Buen día a todos. Vamos a empezar en inglés. Mientras que se van conectando todos, bueno, les damos la bienvenida desde el estudio. Mil gracias a todos por conectarse. La verdad que es un placer ver a tanta gente conocida conectada. Simon, I'll start in Spanish and then I'll switch to English. The activity today will be in English, but let me just, for the sake of those who are connected from Latin America mainly, I see a lot of faces from Brazil, from Argentina. I will record this, so that's it. This is being recorded right now. So, welcome everybody, bienvenidos todos. Muchas gracias de vuelta por haberse conectado. Thank you for joining us. This is something, as we said in the email, has nothing to do with the daily work, but at the same time, I think it has a lot to do with our daily work and daily life. We are having today the honor of receiving Christian Busch, a professor and PhD from the LSE. He's a professor, a visiting professor at the LSE, where he did his PhD, and he's right now a professor at NYU. You might have read the CV, the small CV we sent you with all his details. So for the sake of time, I will just refer to what that invitation says. But honestly, believe me, we are having a keynote speaker that will be definitely great and will enrich all of us today. And that's what we hope to. When we were preparing our meeting today, I asked Christian, are we maybe intuitively cultivating serendipity today? Mi pregunta era si intuitivamente a lo mejor estábamos aplicando serendipity. And that's because this actually, today we were supposed to have an activity with the whole global alumni of the LSE, and I proposed to invite Christian, and I got the green light from the LSE Alumni Association, and then we went to the school to get all the approvals, and the school said, hey, no, you cannot do it. I said, why not? We think he's too good for just a minor event, so why don't we invite him to the formal leadership forum we're having every 2 years at the LSE. So we are having Christian in October, not today, with the LSE community. And honestly, I proposed Christian, hey, we cannot do it as we thought. Can we do something smaller with some friends of ours from Latin America, North America, maybe Europe and somewhere else? And he kindly accepted. So I don't know if we are connecting the dots here, but at least that's one question I'm making myself. Some of us, and at least most of those who are connected from Argentina and some other countries from Latin America, I understand they have already read or know something about Viktor Frankl. And there was a phrase, I don't know if that's correct or not, but I mean, literally, I think he said something like, if you take someone as they are, you make them worse. But if you take them as what they could be, you make them capable of becoming what they can be. Si tomamos a la gente como es, probablemente las hagamos peores. Pero si las tomamos como podrían ser, muy probablemente logremos que ellos realmente se hagan mejores. So, with no further ado, I would like, before we start with Christian, let me just put a minor poll that I would try to put it at the beginning, and maybe if we have some time at the end. We will have the presentation of Christian after the poll, and then we will open a Q&A session for all those who want to make some questions to Christian. Let me just launch the poll. La primera pregunta es si nos consideramos a cada uno de nosotros lucky, sortudos, en Spanish, no sé cómo se diría. Do you see yourself lucky? We have 37 people connected. Now we have at least 90% who consider themselves lucky. We still have some answers to go. 92% lucky, Okay, I think it's while all those who didn't respond finish. I mean, we have a very lucky audience, and that's great. I think it's the good or the right audience for Christian, maybe. We will make the same question afterwards, and maybe that 7% who do not consider themselves lucky might change their mind. I don't know. That's one. As you can see, we have here 93%, 7%. Let me do the second question. Do you know the meaning of serendipity? ¿Alguien tiene idea de lo que significa serendipity? It's not a movie. I mean, obviously there was a movie, if I don't recall wrong, with that name. Había una película, pero la pregunta en real, wow, acá estamos teniendo una amplia mayoría que dice que no sabe el significado de serendipity. We have 65% who say, no, I don't know. I'm 38%, 62%. So the majority of us seem to have no idea what serendipity is. So I think, again,
serenidad, Pablo. Serenidad parece que quiere decir serenidad. Si tenemos serenidad o algo parecido.
We'll see, Fausto. Thank you. We have 62% who say they don't know the meaning, and 38% who say they think they know what it means. And then we go to the last and third question. Where are you connecting from today? Latin America, North America, Europe, elsewhere? ¿De dónde nos estamos conectando hoy? Nuestro objetivo sea principalmente para Latinoamérica, pero invitamos a algunas específicas personas de algún otro lado, incluyendo Asia y Australia. Alguno parece que se sumó. So the vast majority is from Latin America. 72% of the audience is from Latin America, 14% from North America, 10% from Europe, and 1 person from elsewhere. Okay, so said that, as I said, with no further ado, Christian, the room is absolutely yours, and thank you again for accepting this nice challenge.
Well, thank you so much, Pablo, for the wonderful introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world. It's wonderful to meet you, hopefully at some point again in person, for now virtually. This is a topic which is very close to my heart. It's become both a life philosophy and a daily practice. And so I'm very excited to share this with you and also to interact with you and hopefully have a good session around it. Being the German I am, of course, I have a very structured table of contents. So I'd love to start with a bit of context, giving you the context of how we got here, then talking a little bit about the art and science of serendipity. What is it? Why is it so important? And then most importantly, what are some of the practices we can all use to have more of these unexpected positive outcomes in our lives? So to give you a bit of context, I used to be this teenager, who tried to push every boundary and every rule you could push. I was kicked out of school. I had to repeat a year, and I transferred this lifestyle into my driving style. So I probably held the unofficial world record of how many dustbins you can knock over on your way to school when you're driving. And then one day I wasn't so lucky anymore. I smashed into 4 parked cars, all cars completely destroyed, including my own. And I won't forget the policeman who came to the scene, and he said, "Oh, wow, he's still alive." So, this idea that I was supposed to be dead, like that stuck with me. I asked myself all these weird questions, if I would have died, who would have come to my funeral? Who would have actually cared? Was it all worth it? And at that point, I had mostly depressing answers, And so it took me on this intense search for meaning. And Pablo mentioned Viktor Frankl. I mean, he actually became my go-to book. You know how some people have the Bible next to their bed? I have Viktor Frankl. And I started reading Viktor Frankl. And because his book is all about this question of how do we find meaning in the toughest of circumstances? How do we find meaning in crisis? And so to me, it really helped me to understand, oh, wow, what is my own meaning? And what I realized is that what I enjoy doing the most is connecting people, connecting ideas, and somehow initiating some kind of change with that. And so it took me on an intense journey of community building, company building, social entrepreneurship, and then later research and academia. And one thing that I found extremely fascinating is when working with people from across different fields, but also then in the research, is that the most successful, purpose-driven people, they seem to have something in common, which is that they intuitively cultivate serendipity. They see something in uncertainty, they see something in unexpected moments, and turn that into positive outcomes. And so I got very fascinated by how do you do this? How do you create these unexpected positive outcomes? How do you create this smart luck that serendipity is all about? And so this is really the journey, and the book itself has been the result of this journey, over the last kind of 10 years to figure out, what is it actually that we can learn from people from around the world, from Sub-Saharan Africa, where a lot of my work is, to Latin America, to Europe, to the US. What do people who are successful have in common? Why is that the case? And what can we learn from them? And so also it's, it was a great excuse to go very deep into the science of it. And it was fascinating to see how much the social sciences say the same thing as the natural sciences. We'll talk about this later more, but physics, quantum physics tells us a lot about how, in a way, it's a lot about how dots and energy travels. Management science tells us a lot about how the most interesting innovations come across by somehow seeing something in the moment. And so I got fascinated by, how do we bring all these different sciences together? And so the book is really all about a science-based framework for cultivating serendipity. So a science-based framework for how do we create these unexpected positive outcomes, and then how do we develop a muscle for this? What are exercises that we can all do to really go about? Now, to make sure we're all on the same page, a couple of examples of serendipity. If you have erratic hand movements like I do, you tend to spill coffee. And imagine the situation where you are in a coffee shop and you spill coffee over someone next to you, and you sense some kind of connection. You sense there might be something there. You don't know what it is, but you just sense there might be something. Now, you have two options, right? Option number one is you just say, I'm so sorry, here's a napkin. You walk outside, and then you think, what could have happened had I spoken with the person? What could have happened, had I acted on that moment? Option number two is you say, I'm so sorry, you start a conversation, and that person turns out to become the love of your life, or your business partner, or your co-founder. And so the point here is that the same unexpected events can lead to a lot of different types of outcomes depending on how we react to it. Another one here is during COVID. You know how a lot of companies and individuals have been very impacted by COVID. And here is an example of a brewery in Cambodia. And, all their customers went bankrupt when they tried to sell them alcohol. So they said, you know what, that's unexpected, but maybe we can use our alcohol to produce hand sanitizer. And so they became a hand sanitizer company and are now selling their alcohol via hand sanitizers. Another example here, any ideas what that could be on the upper right? I think everyone should have a chat function. If you want to put it in the chat, any ideas what that could be on the upper right?
Viagra.
Well done. Exactly. So this is Viagra. And Viagra, a couple of decades ago, a few researchers, they were giving people medication against angina, and they realized that there was some kind of movement happening in male participants' trousers. And, that was unexpected. They were like, oh, wow, this is unexpected that there's something happening. What would we usually do? We would probably say, oh my God, this is embarrassing. We should either ignore it, or we should find a better way to cure the side effect, right? To get rid of the side effect and to not have that happen. They did the opposite. They said, you know what, that's unexpected, but there's a lot of men in the world who might have a problem in that department. So why don't we focus on this and develop a medication around this? And this is how serendipitously, unexpectedly, Viagra evolved. Any ideas what the top right, the bottom right could be? Chicken skewer. Any ideas what that could be?
No voy a monopolizar la charla. I know the answer, but Claudia's laughing.
So this is a potato washing machine. And so a company I've been working with in China called Haier, it's one of the largest white goods producers. So they produce washing machines, refrigerators, and so on. And a few years ago, they received calls from farmers. And the farmers said, your crappy washing machine is always breaking down. So they asked, why is it breaking down? Well, we're trying to wash our potatoes and somehow it doesn't work. And so what would we usually say? We would probably say, well, look, like this is a clothes washing machine. Don't wash your potatoes in it, right? They did the opposite. They said, you know what? That's unexpected. But there's a lot of farmers in China who might have a similar problem. So why don't we build in a dirt filter and make it a potato washing machine? And that's how unexpectedly the potato washing machine emerged. There's also another example, TEDx Volcano, but that's for another time. And yes, thank you for mentioning, Simon. There's indeed, that's a nice example, a cider company in Cornwall, England, started making sanitizers for the local hospital. So it's definitely not only Cambodia. That's the beautiful thing, that we're seeing this arising around the world. Thank you, Simon, for sharing. And so one thing that all of these examples have in common is that they all are based on this idea that there is some kind of trigger happening, right? So there's some kind of moment happening that's unexpected, right? You're spilling the coffee, there's movement in male participants' trousers, farmers calling up saying, your washing machine is breaking down. That's the trigger. That's an unexpected moment. But now it's all about how we react to it. What is our reaction to it? And so we have to somehow connect the dots to something meaningful. We have to make an accident meaningful, or as we'll talk about later, we can also create more meaningful accidents. But so the point here is we have to do something with that moment and actually then also a lot of times have the tenacity to go through with it. You know, a lot of people who say, oh, we unexpectedly met at a conference and then it was just luck and XYZ. Yeah, but you worked for it a lot of times, right? It's not just enough to spill that coffee over someone and then have a nice conversation. You have to go on follow-up dates. You have to somehow then have the tenacity to actually follow through with it. And so that's the beautiful thing, that serendipity as this kind of unexpected good luck that results from our own actions. So it's very different from blind luck. You know, blind luck, being born into a nice family, like, you know, getting an inheritance, like those kind of things, we can't pick them. So they're passive, right? But actually serendipity is active luck. It's us creating our own smart luck via our own actions. And the beautiful thing is that once we see it as a process of spotting and connecting dots, we can do something for every step. We can create more of those triggers. We'll talk about this in a second. We can cast hooks, for example. We can learn how to connect the dots more, and we can develop our tenacity and doing more around this. The problem, of course, is that we tend to miss serendipity all the time, right? A lot of times we do not see the trigger. We do not see a moment as a potential opportunity that could be there. We might not be able to connect the dots, or a lot of times we might just not have the tenacity to actually go through with it. And I want to actually try something here, and that's, you have to bear with me. This is one of the things, it might go really wrong, but we have to practice what we preach. So let's try this out. And it's an experiment where I need everyone's participation. It will only work if everyone will join us doing it. And so essentially, I want to show you how we all have a lot of biases, right? We all have a lot of kind of ideas of how we look at the world. And there's some of my favorites that we'll talk about. But before we go there, I'd love to ask, what do you think is the probability that two people in this room have the same birthday? So, you know, that two people of you are born on the same day, like January 22nd, February 24th. What do you think is the probability of doing that? Is that 1%, 2%, 5%, very low probability, 1%?
20%.
2%, 1%. So essentially, it seems the agreement is that it's very, very low probability, right? And those of you who are into maths, you might say, oh, great, you know, let's calculate this. Let's say it's 39 people in the room. It's 365 days. So you divide that by each other and you get a very low probability, right? That's the linear way of how we approach life, right? We assume that there is kind of, it's a linear function that we can just divide. Now, I need everyone's, Philip, that's always a good choice. Philip says, I always agree with Pablo. So whatever Pablo says, Philip just agrees. So that makes it easier. But so let's say it seems extremely unlikely. Now I need everyone's participation. Could everyone please just put the day and the month of their birthday? So just February 22nd, January 21st. And if you see two people who have the same birthday, please let us know. I said, if you see two people who have the same birthday, please let us know in the chats or like in other ways. And we need everyone to put their birthdays, and whoever spots two people who have the same birthday, please let us know. Actually, one thing we could do, so let's cheat a little bit just to show you the effect a bit more. Let's say, oh yeah, Marcelo, you wanted to. Marcelo, you had your hand up, or?
Marcelo Greta.
June the 2nd, I see two guys there.
Ah, fantastic, perfect.
Laura.
Perfect. So we have.
Laura Naundio.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Awesome.
Yes, and in the same law firm.
Excellent. Well done. You know, I heard in some law firms they pick based on birthdays, so maybe that's but that's great. So we have at least one birthday couple, right? And so we have another one here. I think Mariana. Who is Mariana and Aspejel? Is that yeah? So we have perfect. So we have that couple as well. So wonderful. So we have one or two birthday pairs already, right? And usually, you know, when you have a group of, let's say, 60 people, you have 3 or 4 or 5 birthday pairs, which is incredible, right? You would assume the probability for that is so low, right? But actually, the probability is extremely high. The probability of 2 people, for example, in a room of 23 people is 50%, right? So it's 50% in a room of 23 people. When you have a room of 70, 80 people, it's 99.99999%. So it's an extremely high likelihood actually that 2 people have the same birthday. And in this room, it was like 70 or 80% the probability that 2 people would have the same birthday. So it's extremely high actually. And so what I want to show you with this, that's those of you who want to learn more about this, it's the birthday paradox. And the idea here is that we think about life linear, right? So we all would have made that calculation and said it's very improbable, but actually it's an exponential function. So, you know, Pablo has 38 people in this room who could have the same birthday. Claudia still has 37 people who could have the same birthday. Mercedes still has 36 people. So it's an exponential function where it's much more than we would expect because it's not a linear function. And so that is actually something, you know, how we look at life, right? We look at life as if we can plan it out, as if we know the variables, we know the factors, we can just go step by step. But actually life has so many variables that is impossible. And that is why the unexpected happens all the time, whether we see it or not. And that's the beauty of once you get into a serendipity mindset, that you realize the unexpected happens all the time. A lot of times we don't necessarily see it. We only see it usually when it's a crisis, right? Or when it's kind of like one big thing, but it happens all the time in smaller ways. And I'll tell you a couple of experiments just as an example in a second. But for now, just saying we have, like all of us have some kind of biases where we just expect certain things, but actually they might not necessarily be the case. That's also, you know, all of you who, if you ever have presented your CV to a new employer, right? You might always say, oh yeah, and then I wanted to do this, and then this, and then this. So you tell it very linear, right? But actually it was probably more like a squiggle, like, yeah, like Maria told me about something, and then I checked it out, and then I ended up here. But we would tell it as if we were always in control. The same thing when you're a CEO in a boardroom, you will say something like, yeah, like I had this strategy, and then I wanted to do this and did this, you know, as if you had it all planned out, but actually it was a bit more like this. And so that's, a lot of times we airbrush serendipity, we airbrush coincidence out of our lives because we need this illusion of control. But actually, what I argue is that, hey, it's actually old school leadership is about pretending that you have it all figured out. It's about pretending that you can control everything. And the new mindset is about saying, I give you a sense of direction. I know approximately where we're going. Here's an approximate strategy, but I'm cultivating an environment where it's more likely that we will see the unexpected positive things coming up. And that is not a sign of imperfection. It's actually a sign of a healthy culture. It's a sign of a healthy, productive environment. So that's really the core here, to say, getting away from a passive idea of something just happening to us to how can we proactively navigate this. And a lot of the session today will be about that question. Now, we talked about some of the biases. There's other biases, right? A lot of times we might have things such as imposter syndrome or fear of rejection that holds us back from having more of those positive things happen. In that coffee shop example, right? You might feel something, but you somehow might not feel ready for it, or other things. So there's a lot of psychological questions we can work on to make it more likely that we actually act on the unexpected. There's also a lot of ways of how we can understand if it actually is serendipity. So one way that we use a lot in science is imagining the counterfactual. So what could have happened, right? So there was an example, for example, a couple of decades ago, where two researchers at the same time discovered when they injected rabbits, the rabbits' ears flopped. And both of them saw that. Both of them were surprised. But only one of them acted on it and said, you know what, let me explore this. And he realized, oh, wow, it's because, you know, the bloodstream is faster. And that led to prize-winning research around arthritis and other health problems related to the blood. But here we can trace back and say, both people had the same thing happen to them, but only one acted on it and had that kind of positive, unexpected outcome. The other one didn't. And so that was serendipity missed versus serendipity happening. One thing I've always been fascinated by is how much it depends on when we look at it, right? So something that seems like a problem in the moment might turn out to become good luck in the long run. I remember, you know, when I had the first draft of the book and I went to the publisher and I was very happy and excited, and they said, hey, look, we love it, but we need more love stories. And I said, well, look, I'm not sure I, as the then 35-year-old single guy, I'm not sure I'm the right person to tell you about love. Like, what do I know about love? They were like, no, but bring us some love stories as well. I was like, okay, well, let me see what I can do. And so right after that meeting, I had a meeting with an ex-girlfriend of mine who I'm a close friend with now. And, you know, I asked her, do you know of any good love stories? And she said, well, our story. And I was like, what do you mean our story? We're not together anymore. Where's the success here? Where's the unexpected good luck here? And she said, look, I mean, we met in a Starbucks, right? Unexpectedly, you know, with like sitting next to each other, getting into conversation. And then we, you know, entered into a relationship. We introduced each other to nice people. We kind of, you know, gave each other emotional support, and it didn't work out, but we put each other on that trajectory that actually made us very happy people today. And so the point is that it made me realize it always looks at, it depends on when we look at it, right? In the moment of the breakup, it seemed like very bad luck that the relationship didn't work, but in the long run, it propelled us actually to have an even nicer life. And it always reminds me of this old saying that if you want a happy ending, it depends on when you stop the story, right? And so it's really the same with serendipity, because it's a process, it depends on when we stop. And a lot of the people, so we just finished a project with 43 leading CEOs. So the people who are running big companies like MasterCard and others, and we sat down and we said, what is it that makes you really successful? And one of the things that a lot of them have in common is that they all have faced real adversity, right? Or real crisis. And then they didn't stop the story. They really kind of went on and they said, hey, look, this can't be the end of the story, and then turned that into that positive outcome. And we'll talk more about this in a second. But so for now, this is just the prelude to say, hey, look, there are these kind of things happening, and we need to understand why that is and what we can do about it. Before I dive into some of the practices, I just want to briefly share an experiment that's one of my favorites. You can hear New York in the background. It's a proper action setup here. And there's an experiment that's one of my favorites when we talked about the importance of wanting to see the unexpected. And one of the reasons Pablo asked the question at the beginning, do you consider yourself to be lucky, is that the way we look at the world already predefines a lot of how much luck we actually will have in the world. There's a lot of structural things that we can't change, right? Someone who grows up in poverty in a favela somewhere has a lower base level for potential serendipity than someone who comes from a more privileged background. So that's a given, and we have to work on those constraints as well in parallel. And at the same time, the way we look at the world also defines a lot of this. And so there's this one example where they selected someone who self-identifies as very lucky. So someone who says, good things always happen to me. I'm a, you know, like lucky person. And someone who says, bad things always happen to me. I'm always in accidents. And, you know, and we all know those kind of two people in our lives, right? And so they tell both people, walk down the street, go into a coffee shop, grab a coffee, sit down, and then we'll have our interview. What they don't tell them is that there's hidden cameras across the street and inside the coffee shop. There's a £5 note, so money, in front of the door of the coffee shop. And inside the coffee shop, there's this one seat that's empty next to this extremely successful businessman who can make big dreams happen. And now the lucky person walks down the street, sees the £5 note, picks it up, goes inside the shop, orders the coffee, sits next to the businessman. They have a nice conversation, exchange business cards, potentially an opportunity coming out of it. We don't know that part. The unlucky person walks down the street, steps over the £5 note, so doesn't see it, goes inside, orders the coffee, sits next to the businessman, ignores the businessman, and that's that. Now, at the end of the day, they ask both people, so how was your day today? And so the lucky person says, it was amazing. I made new friends. I found money in the streets, and potential opportunity, we don't know that. Now, the unlucky person just says, well, nothing really happened. And the point here is that you can face exactly the same situation and have a completely different outcome depending on how you look at the world. And so in this example, we see also different elements, right? We see the element that it's about having our eyes open, right? That's kind of picking up the £5 note. I talked with someone a few weeks ago who came up with his podcast idea unexpectedly because he was taking another street to work for a change, and he looked into some of the windows, and then he saw an old book in a bookstore, and he was like, oh wow, why don't people talk about this anymore? I should do a podcast about this. And that was unexpectedly, he opened his mind to the possibility of things actually coming his way. And then of course there's sometimes an extroversion element, right? Actually speaking with the businessman can be positive, right? Otherwise you can't have that opportunity come out of it. So extroversion can help us sometimes, but a lot of times actually serendipity comes from silent sources, from books, from movies and other things. So those of you who like me are closet introverts, there's a lot of potential in introversion, and actually a lot of times introverts are really good at serendipity because they're good at reflection and connecting dots. Now, what are some practices that we can use to have more serendipity in our life? One of my favorites is the hook strategy. The hook strategy is all about creating meaningful excellence. It's creating more potential triggers and allowing other people to connect the dots for us. So to give you an example, if you would ask Ollie Barrett, a wonderful entrepreneur in London, the dreaded question, what do you do, right? This question we all get at some point in our lives at conferences and wherever we are. He would not only say, I'm in technology. He would say something like, I'm a technology entrepreneur, recently started playing the piano, but what I really enjoy doing is, practicing the science of philosophy, reading into the science of philosophy. Now, what he did here is he set 3 potential dots, 3 potential hooks where you could be like, oh my God, such a coincidence. I recently started hosting piano matinees. You should stop by. Oh my God, such a coincidence. My sister is teaching the philosophy of science. You should come in as a guest lecturer. The point is that we can use every interaction, every conversation to cast a couple of hooks about something we're interested in. And so what I always recommend there is to say, doing a serendipity journal where we write down what are some of the interests we have at the moment, or some of the kind of key goals, or, in my case, for example, getting the serendipity mindset into as many schools and companies as possible. And so I'm trying to seed that into every conversation like here as well, like putting it everywhere and saying, okay, these are a couple of hooks we're setting. And by doing this, we allow other people to connect the dots for us and say, oh yeah, what a coincidence. But we're not throwing it at them. We're not saying, I'm pitching you. We're just saying, let's cast a couple of hooks. And we can do that in every conversation and also at every event. You always see when people ask the first question at the event, right? Smart people ask the question in terms of saying, thank you so much for this inspiring speech. As someone who just did X, Y, Z, I wondered what you would recommend me doing. And that small sentence in the middle that tells you a little bit about the person who asked the question, you will always see 5 or 6 people around this person in the end saying, my God, such a coincidence, you're working on this. I was just looking into this. Can you help me out with X, Y, Z? The point here is that the more we can put potential things out there, the more potentially people can connect the dots for us. We talked about the importance of looking at mistakes and crises differently, like in the example of Viagra. Another one that I love to use in companies and organizations is the project funeral. So the project funeral is all about saying, usually in companies, when something doesn't work, we try to hide it, right? We don't want to be the loser who messed something up or who didn't understand something. And so we don't really learn from each other that much, because the things that we can learn the most from are the things that don't work. And so the project funeral is about saying, whenever a project doesn't work, present it in front of people from other divisions and say what you learned from it. So it's not about celebrating failure, but it's about celebrating the learning from what didn't work. And so in this one example, there was this company, they produced a window glass. And the idea was that the light wouldn't reflect. And so it's an amazing technology, but then they realized, oh, wow, the price point was too high. So they laid it to rest and they said, next time we will try to understand the market better. Now someone in the audience goes, hey, have you considered what this would mean for solar? If you take this technology into a solar context, how much energy that could absorb? And that is how, quote unquote, coincidentally, their solar division partly emerged. Now, the point here is when people talk about it, they would say it was so lucky that this person was in the room. It was so lucky that it was the right moment at the right time. Yeah, but you know what? They designed a practice, a ritual, which made it more likely that this kind of moment would occur. And by definition, we can't know the exact outcome, but we can design practices that make it more likely that those kind of outcomes occur. And that's with a lot of other practices as well. I want to leave some time for conversation as well. So I'm just kind of doing two more and then really diving into our conversation as well. And one that I'm a big fan of, especially when it comes to resource constraints, like at the moment, is the idea of bricolage and making the best out of what is at hand. And so a lot of my work is in low-income contexts, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And there's this amazing organization called Reconstructed Living Labs. And what they do is they have a low-cost education methodology, 10 steps to use social media to build a business. And what they do is they go into new communities, and instead of asking them, what do you need? They ask, what is already here, and how can we make the best out of this? And so when they look at and that comes back to Pablo's point, right? That this idea that serendipity is about potentiality. It's about seeing a bit more in a situation or in a person that is there today. And so they go into a local context and they say, what is already here and how can we make the best out of it? They look at a former drug dealer and they say, fantastic. That person will be extremely resourceful. That person will have amazing social capital. And if we can turn them into a teacher, it will make it cool to be a teacher. If they look at an old garage, they will say, wow, this could be a training center. So the point here is that, in times of resource constraints that we all live in at the moment, instead of saying, can I have more budget? It's about connecting the dots and saying, how can I make the best out of what I have? If I need chairs for an event, do I really need chairs? Or can people sit on the floor? Can they sit on a bench? Can I borrow from the restaurant next door? And so it's really about being more creative and connecting the dots differently, which then leads us to a lot of different unexpected results. One of my favorites is, water cooler moments. This kind of, there's a lot of architectural designs, physical designs we can do to facilitate people bumping into each other, right? So you will see in public spaces, art usually is a way, or at Pixar, I loved always, so Steve Jobs, when he was responsible for Pixar, one of the most creative companies in the world, he wanted to build a new headquarters. And he asked the architects, so give me some ideas of how you would design this headquarters. And the architects came back and they said, let's do one building for management, one building for creatives, one building for the engineers. And he said, what a bad idea. What a bad idea is this? I want those to bump into each other. I want the creative to run into the engineer. I want the management person to run into the creative. I don't want them to be separate. And so he designed one big building and he put the atrium in the middle. And then he put the mailboxes in the middle. And so now the person who's the engineer has to pick up the mail right next to the person who's in management. And so they had to bump into each other. Jobs also tried to only have one toilet in the middle so that everyone had to go to that one toilet, but that he didn't get through with the board. They wanted a couple of more toilets than just one. But the point is we can make structural design decisions about how we incentivize people to bump into each other. And that, of course, is missing a bit during COVID, right? How do you, in a virtual environment, do that more? And so I'm a big fan of random coffee trials. So the idea that, usually when you're especially a young person, the moments that are the most important ones are when you unexpectedly bump into your boss in the hallway or into the boss of your boss, and then there's an opportunity coming out of it. And now we don't have that much. So the water cooler, the random coffee trial is all about saying everyone in the company lists like 1 hour per week they are free, and then they get randomly matched with another person within the company. And then they just go for a virtual coffee. And they might have an inspiring question or something else, but the point is that you still recreate those unexpected encounters across people from different divisions, so to, in a way, also make people feel they're still part of something bigger, especially when they're stuck at home. And last but not least, the last practice is really something that came out, especially out of our research with chief executives, around the question of what makes them really successful. And what the most successful ones are really good at is to say, we have a certain sense of direction. We know approximately where we're going. If I'm the CEO of MasterCard, so Ajay Banga, the old CEO of MasterCard, the previous CEO of MasterCard, he was very good at this. He would say, I have a sense of direction. I want to get MasterCard to be part of tackling the sustainable development goals. I want to use our capabilities to bring people into the financial sector, those who don't have access to financial transactions, for example. Here's an approximate strategy, but I'm open to unexpected new ideas of which strategy might actually work best. And so the point here is that what they all have in common is they have a sense of direction, but also an openness to the unexpected that then allows them to continuously innovate and to continuously go about doing things. Now, how this all comes back to is really the idea that Pablo mentioned at the very beginning, that philosophically speaking, serendipity is all about potentiality. It's all about what could be. And this is really very, very inspired by Goethe. So when I grew up in Heidelberg, we had a philosopher's way, and Goethe was writing a lot of his poems there. And he essentially came up with what Viktor Frankl then was inspired by, this idea that, look, if you take someone or something as what they could be, you make them capable of becoming that. And so that really is what serendipity is all about. It's seeing a little bit more in a moment, seeing a little bit more in a person, and then connecting the dots and turning that into unexpected positive outcomes. And Viktor Frankl took that then and said, you know what? This is exactly what it is, because at the end of the day, we cannot always choose the situation we're in, or we can always choose the response to the situation. And that's where our power, our liberty lies, and at the end of the day, also our serendipity. For now, thank you so much. And I'd love to open up for questions or comments, or maybe also your own, if you have your own tips and tricks of serendipity. Do you have anything, or in your life, any habits that you feel make you have more serendipity? Anything, I'm very open to discuss.
Thank you very much, Christian. Muchas gracias for your enlightening presentation. We do have a couple of questions. I received some privately, and there are some already in the chat box. One thing I would maybe propose, I don't know if you agree, but I mean, I see your email there. Maybe some of us might have some experiences in which we think there might have been some serendipity involved. Why don't we send you our experiences, so maybe you can introduce your own experiences in your next edition of the book. That's just a comment. One question before we go to the room. How do you think serendipity could be different from creativity? Does serendipity anything to do with extroversion or with imagination? While you answer this question, then we will give the room to the audience.
Yeah, it's a great question. I look at it as Venn diagrams, no? Like you have a Venn diagram of creativity, which is a lot about how do you connect dots. You have a Venn diagram of open-mindedness, which is a lot about how do you see something, how do you see dots. And serendipity really is about the process of saying, okay, I have to see something, I have to then do something with it and turn that into something. But it's not only that kind of being a little bit creative in somewhere. So it's really a whole philosophy of life and a daily practice. And that's why I'm so excited about this idea of building a serendipity muscle, because it's really, the more you build that muscle, the more you're then able to spot something in the unexpected and continuously have that serendipity. And, I've always been fascinated. I remember a few years ago, I had a colleague at the LSE actually, who, I was in the early stages of writing the book, and I told him, and he was like, look, Christian, I love you, I love the topic, but I'm okay. I don't need more serendipity in my life. I'm happy, I'm in an okay place. And so we made a deal. We were like, hey, look, you try one or two of these strategies that we talk about, like one or two exercises, just set a couple of hooks. Try next time you're into a coffee shop, like try to set a couple of hooks with people, whatever it is. And then let's check in back in a couple of weeks. couple of weeks later, we talk about it, and he's like, Christian, I didn't know life can be so joyful. I didn't know there's all these things out there. And that's really what serendipity is about. It's not just being creative. It's not just being kind of like a little bit out there. It's about saying this is a way of life. It's a way of life that is, especially at the moment, makes the unexpected and uncertainty from a threat, from anxiety enhancing, into an ally. And so it makes life much easier also psychologically, because you essentially don't feel constantly under fight or flight.
Thank you very much, Christian. Let me give the room to Philip Marson. I don't know if you're in Brussels or London, but I think you have a question regarding synchronicity.
Thanks so much, Pablo. Yeah, so I'm in Oxford. Christian, thank you so much. I really appreciated your points. It's a very sort of joyful way of presenting it all. I think I've operated my life using serendipity probably by accident. But my Twitter handle is competition flaneur. I like, even though we're all specialists, I like kind of wandering around from an interdisciplinary point of view, but also even wandering around cities and just pausing and looking up at things, flaneuring, and then it quietens the mind a bit. So you're not just doom scrolling or looking at your GPS or rushing from place to place. And that's when I notice the serendipitous moments and the connections are built. It reminds me of one of my favorite scenes in one of my favorite books, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, where the person's motorcycle breaks down and he's throwing science at the problem. He's throwing logic at the problem. And finally, he just stops and has a cup of tea and just stares at the machine. And the line in the book is, just stare at the machine. And then gradually a little thought comes up. Is it quiet enough yet? Do you want to listen to me now? And that's the solution. He's found the answer without having to use the manual or anything like that. So I find in our life, one of the things we have to do many times is try to find that space, you know, and not just go from email to work, but try to build in some conscious space. And then this little thought can come up. So I loved your views on that. And the second point I had was, what do you think about synchronicity? So more than serendipity, my life, I think, has been aimed at synchronicity, which noticing coincidences, for example. And a very good friend of mine many years ago said to me, you know, you shouldn't just notice these as coincidences. And perhaps you shouldn't even try to work out what does this coincidence mean. So for example, let's say my daughter says to me the word leopard, and then a minute later I'm reading The Economist magazine, where you would not expect to see the word leopard, and then there's the word leopard, right? Now, so do I have to think, okay, what is the connection? Leopard, daughter, blah, blah, blah. No, but what somebody told me was, there's just a little coincidence there. There's a little thing. Maybe the world is telling you, pause. And so I would pause, and sometimes something else I was thinking about, nothing to do with leopards or daughters or economists, thank God, would come up in my mind. And I always found that was a very interesting way. And of course, some of my colleagues on this call will say, well, no wonder you've had such a horrible career, Philip. You just go back and forth. But I liked how you described, you know, going back and forth, back and forth. You can always put on that narrative. But actually, I've had a really great career, and I'm very lucky because of just going and following my interests. So just grateful for your thoughts about pausing to notice the serendipity, and also about this, maybe even forcing to focus, what is this synchronicity point? It might not be about the two leopards. It might be about something else that is making you pause and think about it.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for the excellent reflections. And it does seem you have a lot of serendipity in your life, and also very intellectual, by the way. The background is amazing, if that's a real one.
Yeah, they're all empty. They're just coloring books.
No, but it's two really interesting questions, and I think the first one, you know, we all probably have had these moments where you're in the shower on Sunday morning, and then eureka, you're like, oh my God, I have the big idea now. And you know, it always seems like, oh, that was just that moment. No, it was literally our brain working on it, and then finally, to your point, having that moment of like, whew, and then you gave it the space to actually connect the dots, right? And so that's actually a lot of times, I cannot necessarily recommend this, I don't think, from a sleep perspective, but one thing that I've been doing, for example, sometimes if I really needed to solve something, is to say, I'm reading up on something, and then I go to bed and I sleep, and then I wake up at 3 o'clock and my subconscious worked on it. And so it's really something where, sorry, I'm just seeing, oh yeah, perfect.
Muted.
And so it's really kind of this idea saying we need to give space to the mind, right? To really connect those dots. And this is why I'm a big fan of meditation also, to really say, just from time to time, breathe, because that's then when we give it the space. So Philip, absolutely, the first point, 100%, that a lot of times we assume that by being busy, it solves anything, but actually, I always love this differentiation between being busy and being productive, that a lot of people are extremely busy, but they're not really productive, and kind of mistaken this again, and taking the step back helps us also to filter a little bit what is really important versus what is just something that keeps me busy at this point. To your second point, I think that's a great one. And it's so Carl Jung, the gentleman who kind of put synchronicity out there, he had this beautiful example, right, where he was with a patient and he tried to talk with the patient about something particular. The patient never really bought into it. And then at some point, the patient dreamt about some kind of animal, some kind of insect. And then the next day, the patient was sitting with Jung in his office. Jung was a psychotherapist. And the patient saw the insect behind the window. And the patient was like, oh my God, that was a sign, that was a symbol. I will buy into everything now that you're saying. The point is that synchronous event, in a way, is exactly, Philip, what you described also with the word leopard, right, popping up right after you were just putting your attention to it. And I think the big difference between those two, I think meaningful moments like the synchronous moments, they make our life very meaningful, right? In terms of like feeling, oh my God, there's like meaningful things happening here. But the way I would look at it, like synchronicity versus serendipity, is that synchronicity is an event in itself, right? It's just happening to us. It's, you know, it helps to have such an open mind as you have, Philip, in terms of saying, great, like I'm actually seeing that leopard is here and seeing the leopard is here. It's a meaningful event. Serendipity then is a process of actually turning it into something, doing something with it, going with it. And so it's more active. So I would see active versus passive as probably the key.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Christian. While I listen to the question and the answer, I think it's a great time once we finish this to reread Carl Gustav Jung, Viktor Frankl, and also why not put a play to the old album of The Police and listen to the Synchronicity song. That was a bad joke. Marcelo Greter, he has a question. Marcelo, do you want to get the room and ask your question?
Thanks, Pablo. Christian, great your ideas. Thanks for that. We are all living in a different world nowadays from what it used to be 1 year ago in a lot of manners. And one of them is our labor life. At least what happens to me if I work in a big company and I haven't been in my office in the last year, at least only 3 times. And what I miss from all things I miss, and not miss the commute, I miss meeting people because meeting people makes creative ideas. That's what I don't miss meetings. I miss meeting people. And what any idea on this or any creative idea on forcing casual encounters in where we're always at Zoom nowadays, you know? And you said something about being busy is not being productive, and nowadays seems like everybody wants to be in a Zoom meeting just to be working at least. So any idea you can bring to us?
Yeah, it's a great one, and I feel it's a very contextual, like depending on the respective context. And I don't think I have a silver or golden bullet for it, unfortunately. But what I always loved is the idea of like looking at Zoom or WebEx as our own private plane. Like this idea that in a way, you know, back in the days, if I would visit a client or someone, like I would have to go to the airport, I would have to check in, I would have to fly to the client, I would have the 2-hour meeting, we would go for drinks, but essentially it would take a lot of time and effort, versus now, I'm literally within 2 seconds in the living room of someone. And one thing that I found very, very helpful is to really reconceptualize it in my mind away from, oh my God, like everything is taken away now, to, oh, actually, there's a couple of things here that also might be in our favor, which is this kind of, you know, like potentially being in each other's lives in a very different way than it was before. And you're right? I think the Zoom meetings are doing the opposite, because they are essentially just making people feel like, oh my God, yet another thing. And I'm just here because I have to do literal FaceTime, right? Versus like actually the meaningful check-ins. And one thing that I've always found interesting for those who have the power in a team to then also maybe shape conversations differently, right? So instead of just doing routine check-ins, like doing everything from maybe a bit more emotional check-ins to like asking things, right? Like what surprised you last week, like peppering up a little bit so that people think about it differently. I think everything that can be done to introduce a bit more meaning into those conversations that potentially are very routine and very like meaningless a lot of times, can really help. So I'm a big fan of the simple question, for example, what surprised you last week? And what it does is it makes us question assumptions. And that's where things like the potato washing machine come up, right? Because people would usually not bring it up because they would think, oh, that was such a stupid thing. Like, why would I even talk about this? But the more we give the psychological safety to people to do that, the more actually then people come up with interesting things. And again, the more we, for example, give people also the emotional license to talk about things that are not about, oh my God, I'm in such a bad place, but more about in terms of, hey, like this is the transition, and this is how I've managed it, because everyone can relate to it, right? And I think that would be my second point, that I think is the first time in history, or at least in our lives, where all of humankind is facing the same enemy. And so we all can relate to the same. We all have exactly the same like enemy at the moment, even if of course some are very differently affected by it. And so I think like redefining it around this, I found very useful as well. And then I've been connecting differently, for example, with people due to that reason. And then third, I think these random coffee trials, like mixing people up randomly for coffees, like adds a little bit of spice as well. But again, I'm afraid, Marcelo, I don't have the golden or silver bullet, unfortunately, but I hope that is some indications. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you, Christian. Susan Wagner, she has an interesting question. Susan, do you want to put it to the room?
Yeah, thanks, Pablo. Thanks, Christian, for the very inspiring hour in lunch break. I wanted to challenge it a little bit in taking up the coffee shop example. Do you think, I mean, it's very unlikely you have shown us with the birth dates that so many people in the room have the same birth date, but actually they have it. If you look at the coffee shop example, certainly not every person you will spill coffee over or bump into will be a big opportunity or the great opportunity in your life. Is there scientific work also on this, like with the birthday paradox, to say in so many situations, so the more situations you create, if you create 100 situations more, you will have 10% of more opportunities or something like this? Or can you say something on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the way I would probably look at it is in terms of filters, right? So what are filters for us? Because, you know, a lot of us, especially those who have more serendipity in their life, you know, it might very easily also just become a distraction, right? You don't want to talk with everyone in a coffee shop, or you don't want to like talk with everyone wherever you are. And so that is really, to me, there's two filters that have helped a lot. One is to learn how to trust my gut better, because usually in those kind of moments, take the coffee shop moment, right? If your gut tells you there is something in the moment, that doesn't happen with like 10 people. That happens with one person because there was something there, right? And so that is usually a good filter, like to develop like a mature gut feeling, not a naive gut feeling, but a mature gut feeling that is based on knowing one's preferences, knowing what one looks for, and those kind of things, which comes back to the Serendipity Journal thing of saying, what are the themes I'm interested in? What is the kind of things in life that are important to me at this point in time, and so on. So I think that kind of developing a mature gut feeling can help. And another one is a lot of times, you know, one of the things that we've been working on with people is to, when you go through the life cycle stages. So let's say you're a student. I'm doing a lot of work with students, and you know, when you're a student, you're at a very early stage in your life. So you potentially go to more events, you potentially should speak with more people, because you're still just trying to figure out what are actually your interests. And a lot of times you might learn that from conversation, and unexpectedly you realize, oh, I like this much more than I like this. And so that is something that is very helpful to start like broad, but then like the more we kind of go in life, the more we probably filter this. And one way I've always found very useful is to think about it more in terms of the kind of event, the kind of person that I want to be at, versus like the kind of bigger piece. And long story short, that's now it's the people entering who come with the time zone difference, probably, right? Pablo, by the way, for those people who might have missed the session, I'm also very happy for everyone, for those in the room and others to connect. I'm on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and wherever you are, delighted to continue the conversation there as well. I know it's a very, trying to talk about a whole book within 45 minutes and I'm sure there's so many people in the room who have like a lot of amazing insights to share. So I'd love to continue that conversation, and hopefully at some point also in Argentina. But for now, and then Susanne, just to close off, so I think it's a big question around filters and how do we learn to trust our filters?
Thanks.
Thank you, Susanne.
Thank you very much, Susanne. We have a question from Uruguay, from Jose Ignacio, somebody who says he's in a swimsuit, so he won't go with his camera on, but he is actually asking, let me get the question. Here you have it. Fernando Malenchini, do you think different educational systems or countries foster serendipity mindset?
It's a great question. And as someone who feels he was educated out of creativity when I was in high school, I'm a big believer actually that there's a lot that education can do in terms of actually fostering the kind of mindset that we've been talking about versus fostering this like illusion of control thinking and this idea that you can know everything and should know everything. It's actually the opposite of that kind of mindset. And one of the things we've been doing a lot of work at, especially with universities, actually is around saying, hey, how do we focus more on that mindset piece? Both in terms of saying it's okay to not have it all figured out as long as you somehow work on the kind of sense of direction, you work on like particular issues where you want to become good at, but in a way it's also teaching this idea that, hey, look, like life is a journey, and like if you assume that you can know everything at the beginning of the journey, you will fail. Like that won't work. So you have to really kind of develop that muscle for it. And so I think the different systems, I'm interested when you think about the cultural component. If you look at like Germany, right, where the idea is you can plan things and you have to plan things and put things into stone, and then you go into real life and you're like, oh wow, like life might not really be like this. And then I just had a conversation in India, or I mean using Zoom as a private plane, being in India, and we just had a conference there which essentially was the opposite, right? Like that a lot of times things might be less kind of planned and a lot of kind of there, and then it needs that kind of orientation frame. And so I think that as usual, a lot of times the truth is in the middle, in the sense of what we talked about earlier, like saying, hey, look, like how do we develop an education system that allows us to understand what's the key priorities, the key areas that are important in terms of content, and then at the same time, the mindset that allows to say, even if I learned this now, that doesn't mean it's still true tomorrow, because we might learn more about the world. Science is consistently emerging and so on. And so I think it's really kind of building that mindset into it. And that's a big focus. And those of you interested in that, that's a big focus of ours at the moment, to really say, hey, how do we make sure that whichever education system we are in, build that mindset piece in? Because again, I don't think it does kids a favor to make them think they know things and then go out in the world and realize a lot of people are just winging it and then feeling unprepared for that. I think it's really building that muscle that's at the core.
Well, Christian, we do have some other questions. Please, everybody, feel free to connect with Christian via email, LinkedIn, as he said. I know, Christian, you need to leave, so we will get maybe the questions to another time. But let me finish with a phrase I found in your book that you said, once we start questioning structures, we open up a whole new world for ourselves and others. And I think that's a very nice conclusion to our activity today. And then let me give another phrase, a popular phrase of that death is life's greatest motivator. So I leave it there. Thanks everybody from all around the world to meet us today. I hope we managed to fulfill our expectations and your expectations. Christian, once more, thank you very much for accepting and connecting these dots. I hope to see you again in the future, not only at the Leadership Forum of the LSE, and to all our friends connected here, thank you very, very much for connecting. See you next time.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Gracias,
Bye.
Pablo.
Thank you, Pablo.
Thank you. Thank you.